Chapter 9 Application International Trade. In this chapter, we answer the following questions. What determines how much of a good a country will import or export? Who benefits from trade? Who does trade harm? Do the gains outweigh the losses? If policymakers restrict imports, who benefits? Who is harmed? Do the gains restricting imports outweigh the losses? What are some common arguments for restricting trade? Do they have merit? Think about the clothes you are wearing today. Number one, where did you get them from? Number two, who works to produce them? What country were they made in? What would your life be? What would your life be like if you had to provide all your own clothing? Determinants of trade. The equilibrium without trade. Only domestic buyers and sellers. Equilibrium price and quantity determined on the domestic market. Total benefits from trade equals to total surplus, and that is consumer surplus and producer surplus. Example 1, Costa Rica, pineapples, and there's no trade. Equilibrium price, $800. Equilibrium quantity, 2,000 tons. Costa Rica produces 2,000 of tons of pineapples per year. The price of pineapples in Costa Rica is $800 per ton. Without trade, Costa Rica consumes 2,000 tons of pineapples, and that is the green area, consumer surplus. The producer surplus is the blue area. Ask the experts. Tariffs and trade deals. Past major trade deals have benefited most Americans, and 93% agree, 7% uncertain. So there's a consensus trade is a good thing. World price and comparative advantage. PW is the world price of a good, the price that prevails in the world market. PD, domestic price without trade. If PD is less than PW, domestic country has comparative advantage. Country should export the good. If PD is greater than PW, the domestic country does not have a comparative advantage. Country should import the good. The small economy assumption. A small economy is a price taker in world market. Its actions have no effect on world price. When a small economy engages in free trade, PW is the only relevant price. No seller would accept less than PW, in other words, can sell the good for world price in the world market. No buyer would pay more than PW, in other words, you can buy the good at the world price in the world market. Example 2, Costa Rica's export pineapples. Without trade, domestic price in Costa Rica is $800 and domestic quantity traded is 2,000. With the trade, the world price raises price to $900. Under free trade, domestic consumers' quantity demanded would shrink to 1,600 along the demand curve. Prices have gone up. Domestic producers would supply 2,700, would be along the supply curve. Exports would be the difference. Okay, 2,700 is supplied, 1,600 is consumed domestically, and 1,100 would be the export. That surplus would be exported. So, without trade, consumer surplus is area A plus B. This is a triangle. Producer surplus is area C. Total surplus is A plus B plus C. With trade, consumer surplus is now A. Price has increased. Producer surplus is now C plus B plus C plus D. Total surplus is A plus B plus C plus D. There is a gain from trade. There is a new triangle that was not there before. That is the gain from trade. Active Learning 1, International Trade. When Romania opened itself to international trade, the price of corn in Romania almost doubled. Number 8, does Romania have comparative advantage in the production of corn? Number B, is Romania an exporter or an importer of corn? Number C, Romanian consumers of corn will be better off or worse off? How about the producers? Number D, are there any gains from international trade? Example 3, Brazil import cocoa beans. Without trade, the domestic equilibrium price is 3,000 and domestic 170,000 tons is traded. The world price, if the country opens up for trade, the world price will be $2,500. Under free trade, domestic consumers will demand 200,000 tons of cocoa beans. Domestic producers will make available 150,000 tons. Then the country will have to import the rest. Because demand exceeds supply, the rest will have to be imported from outside the country, and that would have been the shortage. Now, without trade, consumer surplus is A. Producer surplus is B plus C. Total surplus would be A plus B plus C. With trade, consumer surplus is A, B, and D. Producer surplus is C. Total surplus is A plus B plus C plus D. That area D, that triangle, is the gain from trade. Summary: the welfare effect of trade. When domestic price is lower than world price, the direction of trade, the country will have to export this product. Consumer surplus will decline. Producer surplus will rise. Total surplus will rise. When the domestic price is higher than world price, the country will have to import this product. Consumer surplus will rise, producer surplus falls, and total surplus rises. Whether a good is imported or exported, trade creates winners and losers, but the gains exceed the losses. Active learning too, international trade. Again, when Romania opened itself to international trade, the price of chocolate in Romania declined. Does Romania has comparative advantage in the production of chocolate? Is Romania an exporter or an importer of chocolate? Number C, Romanian consumers will be better off, worse off? How about the producers? Number D, are there any gains from international trade? Ask the experts. Tariffs and trade deals. Imposing new US tariffs on steel and aluminum will improve Americans' welfare. 100% disagree. The effect of a tariff. A tariff is a tax on goods produced abroad and sold domestically. Tax on imported goods. If there's free trade, domestic price is equal to the world price. If there is tariff on imports, that raises domestic price above world price by the amount of tariff. So here, example 4, Brazil imposes a tariff on imports. The world price is 2,500. Quantity demanded is 200,000 tons of cocoa. Quantity supplied is 150,000 tons of cocoa. 50,000 tons is imported. That would have been the shortage if there was no trade. If tariff is imposed of 300,000 tons of cocoa bean, the price becomes 2,800. Price raises from 2,500 to 2,800. Quantity demanded becomes 182. Domestic quantity demanded declines from 200 to 182. Quantity supplied increases from 150 to 162. Import shrinks from 50 to 20. With free trade, when the price was 2,500, consumer surplus was A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F. Producer surplus was G. Total surplus is A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F plus G. With the tariff, P is 2,800. Consumer surplus is A plus B. Producer surplus has increased to C plus G. Okay. Okay. With the tariff, consumer surplus is A plus B. Producer surplus is C plus G. Tax revenue is area E. Total surplus is A plus B plus C plus E plus G. There's a deadweight loss of D plus E. Import quotas, another way of restricting trade. Import quotas, quantitative limit on imports of a good, mostly has the same effect as a tariff. It raises price, reduces quantity of imports, reduces buyers' welfare, increases sellers' welfare. A tariff raises revenue for the government. An import quota generates surplus for those who obtain the permits to import. International trade. Other benefits of international trade increases variety of goods for consumers, allow firms to take advantage of economies of scale, makes markets more competitive, makes the economy more productive, and facilitates the spread of technology. Arguments for restricting trade. One, there is the job argument. Trade with other countries destroys domestic jobs. Free trade creates jobs at the same time that it destroys jobs. Total unemployment does not rise as imports rise because job losses from imports are offset by job gains in export industries. US imports and unemployment since 1960. It looks like over the time we are importing a lot more than we are exporting, and the gap seems to be larger. Arguments for restricting trade too. The national security argument. The industry is vital for national security. Protecting key industries may be appropriate when there are legitimate concerns over national security. Companies have an incentive to exaggerate their role in national defense and obtain protection from foreign competition. Arguments for restricting trade. Three, the infant industry argument. New industries need temporary trade restriction to help them get started. Older industries need temporary protection to help them adjust to new conditions. It is difficult to implement in practice. The temporary policy is hard to remove. Protection is not necessary for an infant industry to grow. Argument for restricting trade. For the unfair competition argument. Free trade is desirable only if all countries play by the same rules. Importing from a country that subsidizes production increases in total surplus for importing country. Imports of low cost products subsidized by the other country's taxpayers. The gains to our consumers will exceed the losses to our producers. Argument for restricting trade. 5. The protection as a bargaining chip argument. Trade restrictions can be useful when we bargain with our trading partners. The threat of a trade restriction can help remove a trade restriction already imposed by a foreign government. The threat may not work though. Ask the experts. Tariffs and trade deals. Refusing to liberalize trade unless partner countries adopt new labor or environmental rules is a bad policy because even if the new standards would reduce distortions on some dimensions, such a policy involves threatening to maintain large distortions in the form of restricted trade. What do economists say? 49% agree, 26% are uncertain, 25% disagree. Case study. Trade agreements and the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization, or WTO, a unilateral approach to achieve free trade, remove its trade restrictions on its own. Great Britain in the 19th century, Chile and South Korea in recent years. Multilateral approach to free trade, reduce its trade restrictions while other countries do the same. NAFTA and GATT. North American Free Trade Agreement or NAFTA in 1993 lowered trade barriers among the United States, Mexico, and Canada. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, continuing series of negotiations among many of the world's countries with the goal of promoting free trade. GATT. The United States helped to found GATT after World War II in response to the high tariffs imposed during the Great Depression. Successfully reduced the average tariff among member countries from 40% to 5%, enforced by WTO. August 2018, 164 countries with more than 97% of world trade under GATT. Advantages of multilateral approach. Potential to result in freer trade than unilateral approach. Reduce trade restrictions abroad and at home. Political advantage. Producers are fewer and better organized than consumers. Greater political influence. Think, pair, and share. You are watching the presidential debate. A presidential candidate says, I am for free trade, but it must be fair trade. If our foreign competitors will not raise their environmental regulations, reduce subsidies to their export industries, and lower tariffs on their import of our goods, we should retaliate with the tariffs and import quotas on their goods to show them that we won't be played for fools. Number A, if a foreign country has lax environmental regulations and direct subsidies and then exports the products to us, who gains and who loses in our country? Think, pay, and share continued. Number B, if a foreign country subsidizes the production of a good exported to the United States, who bears the burden of their mistaken policy? Number C, what happens to our overall economic well being if we restrict trade with a country that subsidizes its export industries? Explain. Number D, if there any difference in the analysis of our importation of a good sold at the cost of production or sold at a subsidized price, and why? Number E, is it a good policy to threaten trade restrictions in the hope that the foreign government will reduce their trade restrictions? Explain. Chapter in a nutshell. The effect of free trade can be determined by comparing the domestic price before trade with the world price. A low domestic price indicates that the country has a comparative advantage in producing the goods and that the country will become an exporter. A high domestic price indicates that the rest of the world has a comparative advantage in producing the good and that the country will become an importer. When a country allows trade, if it becomes an exporter, producers of the good are better off and consumers of the good are worse off. If it becomes an importer, consumers are better off and producers are worse off. The gains from trade exceed the losses. A tariff reduces the gains from trade. Domestic producers are better off and the government raises revenue, but the losses to consumers exceed these gains. There are various arguments for restricting trade, protecting jobs, defending national security, helping infant industry, preventing unfair competition, and responding to foreign trade restrictions. Although some of these arguments have merit, in some cases, most economists believe that free trade is usually the better policy.